Welcome, Dr. Dan.
Well, good morning. Nice to be with all of you. Obviously, for me, the webinar format is not my preferred format, so by all means, if there are questions there as we go through all of this, make sure that you get to them through, and we'll see what we can do to address those questions and those concerns. We're piggybacking a bit on what we were working on previously in our first seminar, and just to review a bit, we talked about the idea that the adolescents that we are treating are those individuals who are on that developmental vacation, and that there are really two components to treatment involved with that. The first would be disrupting whatever that dynamic may be that has created and has evolved and is now supporting that adolescent's developmental vacation. And their capacity, while being on the developmental vacation, while being the center of the universe, while engaged in that egocentric orientation in their lives, that their capacity to be able to use external means of support as dependencies. We talked as well, if you will remember, dependencies falling into three categories: those of the human variety, those of the more traditional variety, and then also those of the process variety as well. What we will be speaking to today will be addressing more of those issues associated with the human dependencies, and particularly in regards to disrupting the adolescent's capacity to manage those in the treatment system as a dependency, and avoid having them continue to replicate a somewhat malfunctioning system of coping, so that we're not just extending it on one more layer in thinking that we are actually providing great treatment, but in reality we're just helping the adolescent become more adept in their capacity to stay on that developmental vacation. So we're going to approach this in a manner that I have found over the years has been extremely helpful in addressing some of these concerns in setting up a treatment system and a treatment design, and coalescing all of the numbers involved with that treatment design around a unified orientation. So we're going to take a look at it from this perspective, and I have a friend and a colleague, and it would be interesting to know if any of you have actually met Jared Balmer as well. We actually attended same university, and I've actually, I guess it's been like 20 years or so, a couple of decades, that we have rubbed elbows, so to speak, and he has been an individual who has been the administrator and owner of a number of adolescent treatment organizations as well. And we had a conversation at one point that has stuck with me and generated a lot of thought from my perspective, and he indicated that, from an administrative perspective, and if you are administrating an adolescent treatment program, essentially you only have three problems. And if we were to rank these in the order of difficulty, then problem number one on this would be employees and staff, those individuals who are actually running the program, those individuals who have that direct interaction with the students, those individuals, right? Okay, then the second problem that we would have to deal with would be parents as well. And again, those of you that have been involved with adolescent treatment, particularly from a residential setting, will have some understanding of what this might be, and we'll address this a little bit further on down the road. But then number three in all of this would be the actual students or the clients, those adolescents that we are treating, and typically we don't necessarily look at this as being a problem, primarily because this is what we have been trained to do, and this would be the purpose that we have in addressing those adolescents. We know what we need to do with them. So let's take a look. We're going to examine these problems from a bit of a perspective that may help us begin to address these wherever it is that we might be laboring at this point, or just even if we are working on an outpatient basis to be able to understand, well, gee, how can I kind of come to a unified understanding of how I am interacting with adolescents, and also gives us an opportunity to examine whether or not we actually are disrupting that dynamic, or if the adolescent continues to keep that dynamic in place with us as the treatment coordinator. So let's start here with these, and I'm sure that as you think about this, and I'm sure that your experience has also led you to recognize that there are many other problems that we can talk about here. But the other part about this is that over the years, I certainly have come to the understanding that particularly in a residential setting, those direct line staff, the individuals who are consistently and constantly interacting with the student, are the individuals with whom the true therapy is taking place. Obviously, the kind of interpretive work that the therapists would be doing, and the group work, and all of those other kinds of things would be an adjunct to all of this. But if we were to actually be able to measure change in the orientation of the student who is in treatment, it's going to take place in the relationship that they have with those individuals that are with them all of the time. And one thing that is absolutely necessary is to be able to have those direct staff be able to create an arena in which that change can be manifest. And if the direct line staff are unable to do that, then it's difficult to determine, well, what's really changing? Is it the student, or is the student just somehow managing the staff here? Or are the problems that are being created, are these actually problems with student coping, or are these difficulties that are brought on by a well-intentioned staff but maybe somewhat misinformed? So there's a couple of difficulties here, you know. Obviously, and as you well know, there are thousands of adolescent treatment programs in existence across the United States. And some of these programs are administrated in very remote locations, particularly wilderness-oriented treatment programs. And then there will be some of those other programs that are administrated in more rural areas and tend to take advantage of the facilities that would be available in that setting. And as such, occasionally there will be a somewhat limited population available for administrators to select those individuals that would be working with them in their program. You don't always get to have those kind of situations where there may be carloads of anxious young undergraduate psychology majors who are looking to get some experience and get something to put on their resume as well, and who have the intention of continuing along in human services. Occasionally, the population that we have are those individuals who are there and who need a job. These would be individuals who have not previously had any kind of a background, and this is not necessarily a negative thing. You know, sometimes those staff who come to this with some type of an understanding of how things should be but it may be in some direct contention with really how we are attempting to administrate the program. But they have really no background in the human services, again, inexperienced staff. And again, depending upon the program and depending upon what we're doing, at times there may be limited resources for training and education on many of those treatment programs of which I have been familiar. The individuals who are running the programs wear a lot of hats, and there's not necessarily one individual who would be responsible for the training, education, and resource management with the teaching and training staff. This tends to be the one that is most problematic, that there really is not a shared vision, or there is a kind of a variable shared vision depending upon who would be there at the moment. And that it's very difficult for everyone in the program to come to an understanding of what it is that we actually do and how do we measure what it is that we are doing. For those of you that have been working in residential kind of programs and had experience with educational consultants, to some degree, educational consultants have been very good in assisting programs in coming to an understanding, because they come in and they look at the program, they interview the people that are there, and they need to talk to even the frontline staff and get a sense of, do the staff have an understanding of what it is that we are actually doing here? And it's important. It's important for those administrators to recognize that everyone needs to be on the same page as far as that is concerned. As we continue this, then we find that there will be those employees from shift to shift who will have that tendency to want to run their own version of the program that is according to their understanding of what it is that the adolescent is there to receive and what they need. And again, this can cause problems because it's not a part of the shared vision. We find as well that there is a distinct variance between staff members, between individual staff members, or in different shifts, that there's a distinct difference between the members of one shift and how they administrate their functions and how the members of the other shift would do that. This one tends to be a pretty common scenario in which there is one or two staff who tend to be those that are identified as the individuals who can manage whatever situation might occur. And if there is a particularly problematic scenario that emerges, or if there is a particularly difficult to engage adolescent who may be there, then there will be the magic staff or the wizards, whoever they might be, that we have some reliance upon those individuals to fix the situation. I've also seen in my consultations between in a number of different programs that we find that there tends to be a contest that takes place between staff and sometimes the clinical program for the allegiance of the client, as to be able to have the client be identify who is actually helping them the most, and who actually has the greater understanding of what's going on with the student, that kind of thing. And at times there can actually be some attempt between the two departments or two or more departments to sabotage the efforts of the other department. This is also another one that's difficult for administrators, in which staff are beginning to gain a sense of their own personal identity, or a personal image would probably be a better way of describing this, beyond just an employment status, and that they have some sense that they need to be further validated beyond just being an employee, but they need to be further validated as a human being, just beyond their function. And there entire sense of themselves is based upon their association or their function within the program. That quickly becomes a difficulty. We've kind of talked about this one. There would be those individuals who have their own agenda and determine that it's necessary to sabotage the program goals or standards. This can be incredibly damaging to a program. There are those staff, again, that will align themselves with the client, or sometimes even this can extend to aligning themselves with the parents, and this would be against whatever the organization is or whatever the treatment modality may be. Then, of course, there are those staff who can be quite detrimental to a program because of their own poor boundaries and their inability to establish those boundaries and keep themselves in a professional role in their interaction with the students. And on occasion, and there have been a number of times when I have had some consultation with programs where they find this to happen is that occasionally there will become a somewhat toxic culture within staff circles or within a specific department, and it's difficult to manage that, and it's difficult to manage that at the same time while we are attempting to provide a consistent, stable treatment orientation for the students as well. Now, as we continue here, there are a couple of things, and truly, I would have to preface this by saying over the 25 years of working with parents of children who have been in programs, for the most part, I would have to say that I have truly enjoyed my opportunity to engage with the parents and help them find a new dynamic of interaction with their child and be a part of that treatment orientation. But there will be those occasional parents who struggle to come to an understanding of the same vision that others have as well. And in this regard, then, there will be those occasions when parents cause some difficulties in our ability to provide the treatment here as well. Some of these would be that the first one is that parents have that insistence on continuing, even though their child may be in some treatment modality, but they have that insistence that they need to continue to replicate that family dynamic. And this is the same dynamic that originated the developmental vacation in the first place, and it's also the dynamic that continues to support that developmental vacation. It's difficult for parents to recognize that this is what they're doing. Also, here we go, once again, the parents are triangulating with the students against the program. And, there will be those occasions, and it does actually happen. My sense would be that if you were to talk to almost any admissions person or talk to anyone who has the job of engaging with parents throughout the treatment duration, their students' enrollment in the program, they'll find that there will be those parents who seem to immediately now engage with the program, so to speak, as being the good parent. And the parents now will engage with the program in the same dynamic, in the same manner that their child has been engaging them. And part of this is that kind of projective identification that we can see here, in which the parents, to some degree, almost need the program to fail, to some degree. In that way, it validates that they really, as parents, don't need to change, and that even the program or the supposedly good enough parent is not able to actually handle their child or manage their child or assist their child in coming to a new understanding of themselves. That if the program fails, then it validates them as well, in that, see, it's not really us as parents, this really is the child that is causing this problem. Here we go. This is the other one where parents, rather than stay focused on this whole dynamic of disruption, or rather than becoming focused on the actual grunt work associated with doing the therapy, then they become incredibly oriented towards the more superficial kinds of things, the little check boxes, yeah, that kind of thing. Well, tell me what level is on this week, those kinds of things. How's his academics going? Did he get this grade on his paper? Those kind of things. And parents tend to want, these parents, I would say, they tend to just want to look at things like the check sheet and look at even therapeutic kinds of assignments as, let's just get the little check mark in the box, and as soon as we have all the check marks in the box, then he's ready to come home with the stamp of approval on his forehead, that kind of thing. As opposed to recognizing, hey, you know what, it may be part of that dynamic that is contributing to the fact that your child is not really grown up. They're just putting on this superficial fascia to demonstrate superficial compliance, and that way they can continue to be invisible and get away with whatever they want to get away. Okay, this one, again, and on many occasions, this sense of victimhood has come from a parent's inability to manage the disruptive nature of their child's own emotional outbursts. And it's likely started at a very early age in the family dynamic. And parents see themselves as victims, and they are going to struggle as well if there is some structure imposed by the program. Occasionally there will be those parents who find that way to sabotage that structure, and once again they will triangulate themselves with their child against the program, replicating the dynamic that has been in place for quite some time. Here we are, obviously there are those parents who are pretty far down the road in their own dysfunction, those that clearly will need to be working in their own individual work, therapeutic work as well, and to some degree want to piggyback on the work that their child is doing, but obviously need some more intense individual work as well. And this is that one too, that parents who, it sometimes amazes me that parents will be willing to make an incredible sacrifice and spend an exorbitant amount of money to have their child in treatment, but yet at the same time they will want to continue to control the nature of that treatment, keeping it consistent with what has already been in place, as opposed to disrupting the dynamic. No, it needs to keep going this way, or that they need to be the one that is actually telling the therapist or whoever the therapeutic manager may be what it is that they need to be doing with the child. And it can cause that conflict between, the program and the parents. This one also tends to be difficult for those that are working with adolescents, that there will be parents that instead of engaging as parents and having some sense of themselves as the parent in the dynamic, they will also defer to as many peripheral individuals as they can find. Typically, the students, therapists who we have been seeing at home, their psychiatrists, maybe their teachers at times. This can be an ecclesiastical leader, whoever that they can bring into the mix, and it makes it much easier for that child to once again replicate the ongoing dynamic with even just one of those individuals, and there really will be no disruption that takes place. Then, again, as we mentioned before, the client problems are really the least of our worries. But in this regard, if we are actually going to be treating adolescents, then there's some questions that as treatment providers we absolutely must answer. It's like, okay, really, what is the actual condition requirements right now? Why is this student here? and how do we conceptualize this? Like, what kind of a nosologic system are we going to use to describe this condition? And as you will remember from our discussion last time, talking about the condition is that this is a child that's on a developmental vacation. That really is the condition, independent of diagnosis and even inclusive of diagnosis. We're still on a developmental vacation. That really is the problem, right? Then how about this one? How do we know that the treatment that we're providing is actually appropriate? How do we know that if this is the condition that we are treating, how is this treatment going to provide that outcome that we're looking to have? And the other one then as well is how can parents know? And how can anyone actually measure this if the treatment is indeed having its intended effect? If we're providing this treatment, are we just, what is it that we're actually just looking to achieve? And on many occasions, we will have parents who tend to ascribe something like compliance to this. Well, I just need my child to comply. I just need them to follow the rules. I just need them to be able to engage in structure. And compliance is not always a good indicator of actually having made some internalized change. So we need to be able to articulate, so then what will we be looking at? How is there a way to assess whether or not there is any kind of change that's taking place? And how do we know when it's over, right? We start treatment with the idea that you're moving towards discharge from day one. So, how do we know when we're finished? Now, as we've talked about this developmental vacation, okay, so we're actually hoping to provide by the interventions that we're engaging with our adolescents here, that that number one, that they're going to grow up, that they're going to move out of that childhood developmental stage, that they can actually complete the developmental tasks of childhood, and that at some point then they're going to re-engage in their developmental continuum as that adolescent, so that they can actually achieve the adolescent developmental tasks that they would have in their lives as well. So, how do we know that this is happening? Well, we talked a little bit last time about the idea that we can take a look at whether or not this student is actually resolving those developmental tasks that they have. The developmental tasks of childhood, coming to that understanding that there is such a thing as benevolent structure in their life, coming to an understanding that there are those individuals in their lives who would be the purveyors of benevolent structure, that all structure is not necessarily an invitation to go to war, that all structure is not necessarily a threat to their sense of self. Those kinds of things. We talked a little bit about that last time. And then also recognizing, well, gee, as an adolescent then, are they fulfilling those adolescent developmental tasks? Is there an emergence of a stable identity more so over the necessity to engage an image in their life? Those kinds of things. Those would be the types of things that we would be looking at to determine, hey, is it working or not? Let's take a look at a couple of things here from Fritz Perls. Fritz was a guy that has had a fairly direct influence in my life, and my introduction to just psychology in general came from one of his disciples, one of his students. But here's essentially what he is saying. This has been some of his earlier work, where he's talking especially about this principle, this whole notion of being stuck on a developmental vacation, and that idea that instead of growing up, what I am actually doing is I'm using my wisdom, knowledge, and competencies to be able to maintain control of the dependencies that I have in my life. I'm using the humans in my life, particularly my parents, as those dependencies. And I've become incredibly adept, incredibly masterful at ensuring that these adults will be delivered as a dependency in my life. Then as we continue here, I like what he is, what he's saying here. It's like the more character a person has, the less potential he has. And when we're talking about character, we're talking about an image as opposed to an identity. It's not really acquiring an identity. I am just creating and honing an image that I will find is going to be incredibly effective in being able to engage the adults that I encounter in my world as dependencies, and I stay in control of that dynamic. And it's good that last sentence there is that a character is a person that is predictable and that has only a number of fixed responses, which is really true. If I am dependent upon my image to give me that external sense of well-being, then I don't have a broad range of coping available to me. Absolutely. Now, there's another guy here that I thought kind of nailed this one right on the nose as well, James Masterson. And he identified two attributes that adults have that differentiate them from adolescents and from children. Okay, and the first of these is the ability to soothe our own painful emotional feelings, okay? The capacity to manage, to self-soothe. And as you well know, that even under the best of circumstances, it takes us a lot of years of our lives to figure out how to do this. And this is one of those things that suffers greatly when the student decides to go on a developmental vacation and does not develop that internal capacity to self-soothe and continues to be overly reliant upon some external dependency to try and manage that painful emotional material. So the second one here is may not be something that you would think that it would be, as Masterson identifies this, but certainly for me, this makes an awful lot of sense, having spent a couple of decades with adolescents, out-of-control adolescents in a wilderness setting. And I find how terrifying it is for them to be alone. And as we talk about being alone, what does that really mean? Well, it means that I have the capacity, number one, to sit with whatever that material may be in my brain, that I can sit with it and be okay with it, that I don't need some kind of a distraction, I don't need to be plugged in, that I can sit with whatever there and be all right. And in some sense, be able to tolerate whatever that ennui or that boredom might be. I can manage it. I'm fine. The other part about this is that I don't need someone else to give me validation. I don't need someone else to play off of. I don't need someone else there to give me a sense of my own presence. I can do that for myself. And again, this would be one of those things that it takes us a while to get to this place. And certainly those adolescents who are on that developmental vacation are not creating these two attributes within themselves. So as we look at this and we think of resistance to treatment, and sometimes we also look at this as resistance within the treatment provider. But actually we can look at this as this is the individual who is attempting to maintain a homeostatic system wherever they may be. Like I don't want to give up those things that have become my dependencies. I do not want to give up whatever that dependency might be, even if it's a human dependency, that gives me my sense of normalcy in the world. So, as we encounter them, we also encounter an individual who has had a lot more practice at maintaining those dependencies than we have and others in their lives have been able to disrupt that reliance upon those dependencies. So when they come into treatment, what happens, right? Here they are. They have every expectation that as they engage in a treatment system, that they will have the capacity to once again replicate that dynamic that allows other humans in their lives to be dependencies, as opposed to being actual human beings. Keep those individuals as objects. And as long as they do that, then there really is no need for them to come to any degree of change in their lives. Okay, and in this regard, what we will find is that the weak spots of the program, and particularly that intersection, that nexus, so to speak, between the program and the family, they will be incredibly vulnerable to those students' efforts to continue to engage in that same dynamic, to use now the program and continue to use the family dynamic as a dependency, as opposed to finding an alternative way to cope with the vicissitudes of their lives. Now, one of the things that I have found over the years to assist in this is kind of an adaptation of Eric Berne transactional analysis. And I certainly know that there are others out there who know this system better than I. And at the same time, I recognize that this is a bit of an adaptation, in which, as you have likely some familiarity with this, you can recall that at the core there is this notion that as human beings at any point in time we are operating from one of three different stances, parent, adult, and child. And one of the things that Berne allows with all of this is the notion that these are very transient states. They are variably developed within us, and depending upon the situation and depending upon the other individual with whom we may be interacting, we would be operating from one of these three states. And Berne also gives that system for understanding, are we having a genuine interaction, are we having a crossed interaction, are we being manipulated, and so forth. Now, one of the things that we would want to do as an adaptation, and if we are using this as a system to have all members of the treatment group on the same page, is it's come to an understanding that we are disrupting a solidified dynamic, and that we're actually not dealing with kind of transient states necessarily. And as we talk about each one of these individually, we come to the recognition that as we talk about the parent state, then typically we are looking at those individuals in our students' lives who have been the authority figures, the actual parents, and also the idea that now, as that student has engaged in the program, then they are going to attempt as much as possible to continue to replicate this dynamic with the administrators and with the frontline staff, anybody that would be in that program. So in this regard, we will be looking at the parent, recognizing that there are two of these ego states that we can talk about with the parent. There's the critical parent, and in the system that typically we are examining and attempting to disrupt, we will find that there will be someone who is stuck in that critical parent mode, who has the primary emphasis in their life of being right, of being correct, of being the ultimate authority figure, and of essentially recognizing that the critical parent now is going to use others in their lives to validate them as being the guy who knows better than everybody else, as being the one who who knows how things are going to go, and who ultimately will get that validation by um, ensuring that they have the capacity to make everyone else do what they want them to do. So obviously the critical parent is going to be the guy that's like, you're going to do it my way because I said so, and if you don't do it my way, I'm going to find some way to coerce you. I will argue with you. I will debate with you. I will do whatever is necessary to make sure that you are going to do this my way. Then we have the nurturing parent, and again, you know, if we are coming from more a burn stance, we recognize, well, gee, as parents, we will have to adopt both of these stances at some point in our engagement with our children. And, you know, particularly at the point where our children do not have the capacity to do this for themselves, we will have to do this. But again, if we were to look at someone who has solidified themselves in that nurturing parent role, and essentially this would be that parent who has decided, I can't really be the parent, I don't want to be the parent, I want to be the friend. And as such, what I am going to do is I am going to insulate you from anything that you might be encountering as my child that would be distressing, anything that might be somewhat depressing to you, anxiety-provoking, anything that might be too difficult for you. I am going to insulate you from that. I will manage that for you. But in so doing, I'm also teaching you this notion that if you are going to be happy in your life, then your happiness has to come through me. That you will validate me by doing what I want you to do. Otherwise, I am going to unload a tremendous amount of shame and guilt on you. And I will continue to make it so that you recognize that if I'm not happy, there's no way that you can be happy as well. And one of the things that we have worked on with parents around this idea is this notion that if we want our children to be happy, then we have to allow them to experience the pain of their lives, okay? If we are essentially saying to them, look, I'm going to insulate you from all of these pain, I'm going to insulate you from all of these challenges, I'm going to make it so that you don't have to experience anything that is distressing, then also what I am saying to you is that you will not be able to be independently happy as well. If you are looking to some external source to manage the pain in your life, then you will also be looking to some external source to be happy in your life as well. Okay? So that's that nurturing parent. And the nurturing parent is that one that ideally the students are looking to when they decide, gee, this is too difficult for me to manage, so I need somebody else to do this for me. Now, as we're training staff and as we're examining ourselves, we recognize, gee, as soon as a student is enrolled within the program, then they will be attempting to do what is ever necessary to turn whoever is engaged with them into either the critical parent or the nurturing parent. And the reason why they would do that is because they have been able to defeat these two roles and are very adept at doing this. So, you know, those that are unaware will find themselves caught up in these roles with adolescents, and it does nothing to disrupt the developmental vacation, and it does not allow at that point for any other kind of intervention to take place in which the child now must experience themselves as coping differently than they previously had. Now, the ways that the adolescents typically will do this is by moving into the child ego states, okay? And this is where all of the emotion lives, and this is particularly where the child's inability to manage their own painful emotion lies. And I see that we probably will not be able to talk in depth of too much about how all of this is going to go, but in essence, there are these four child ego states as well. There's the natural child, in which I cannot manage any degree of any kind of degree of discomfort. I'm continuing to expect someone else to do that. The rebellious child, where I have this sense of myself, and the only sense of myself is that I am not you, and all of my actions go into waiting for you to establish some kind of a structure or a definition of yourself so that I can demonstrate to you that I can defeat that. There's the adaptive child, in which I pretty much have the capacity to do whatever I want to do because I know how to become invisible to you and how I can continue to make anything that may be an issue your issue and not mine. And then finally, the little professor, which is kind of the king of all of these, and there's a common thread running through all of this. But, you know, the little professor is that individual who looks at this as just a huge game. And I'm finally getting to the place of the little professor as well, where not only am I lying to you, but I'm lying to myself, and I begin to believe my own lies. So, in essence, in all of this, again, to wrap this up, what we need to do in all of this today is recognize that ideally, as opposed to falling back into particularly the critical parent and nurturing parent ego states, we want to be able to find ourselves, and even those that are working on the front line with those staffs, to be in the front line with our students, to be in that adult ego state. And probably the best way to understand that adult ego state is recognizing that the adult ego state is the only one here in all of these that does not require external validation. So the adult ego state is that place where I can give that student an arena to actually demonstrate to me his defense mechanisms and how he is going to interact with me. And it will be more about the student than it will be about me. That is the important place. And you know, one of the things too, as we are teaching staff concerning this, I like to remind them that, look, this has to be a place where it can't be about you. The child's parents are not paying the amount of money that they are paying to have their child in treatment so that you can be the one that's receiving the treatment, not their child. So part of this then is helping give the staff some strategies, and also being able to understand for yourself, even as the treatment provider, as how do I stay in that adult mode, particularly when I'm encountering a student who has adopted one of those child ego states and is working incredibly hard to move me into either the critical or nurturing parent. So we'll talk a little bit more about that this next time. I recognize that we are down to about 5 minutes apparently. So I need to find out if there are any questions or if there is anything else that we can cover on this today without having to move further along with this.
We don't have any questions at this time yet. If anybody has them, please type them in, and we can get those answered within the next few minutes.
Well, one of the things then that we would want to stress here, especially if we're looking at the idea that ultimately, you know, how do we know if the treatment is having its intended effect? That we are beginning to see the nature of the interactions that we are having with the student that we are treating as being more in that adult mode, as opposed to, you know, when we first encounter the student, when they in treatment, and they are in the first stage of treatment, which I typically like to refer to as landing, just acknowledging that this is actually happening. And typically, when we initially encounter them there, they are still involved in that place where they are not ready to engage in any kind of a therapeutic orientation. They're in that Prochaska's pre-contemplative stage as well, and so they're recognizing that, no, I really don't have a problem, and if there is some kind of an issue, it will be because somebody else has the problem. And so all of their energy as that natural child is realizing, gee, I'm in a circumstance that I don't really like. I may be in a situation now where I don't have an immediate access to the nature of the dependencies upon which I've had this reliance. And so, the first thing that I will be doing is devoting all of my energy into finding a way to replace my dependencies. Whether it's going to work on my parents to attempt to convince them that their decision to have me in treatment was not the correct decision, it was all just a huge mistake, or that they were misled by having me come to treatment, that this may not be the treatment that I actually need to have in my life, whatever that might be, or if it might be for me to be focusing on turning someone within the immediate treatment milieu into a dependency. Having that individual be the one that's going to save me, whatever that might be. So, as we start from that place and we begin working forward to a place where ultimately the student that we are working with is moving beyond the need to have someone else or something else intervene to manage the difficulties that they encounter, and that they are no longer engaging others in one of those child ego states in which they are expecting someone else to actually manage the difficulties that they encounter, even the difficulties that might be part of the treatment milieu, or they're not necessarily acting out, or that they are not just trying to be invisible, but they're being more genuine, and that they have that capacity to engage in the adult mode, and that their lives begin reflecting that as well. It's not just mere compliance. Okay, so I guess we have a question here.
Yes, we have a question from Ida from the audience. She wants to know if you could repeat the quote by Fritz Perls about maturing is the transcendence.
Sure. Yeah. Let me go back to it if that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's get back there. This one?
Yes. There we go.
It's a good picture of Fred still, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that's the only one we have right now, so you can go ahead and wrap it up if you want.
Okay, let's. I'm going to move it back through here. And probably didn't get to spend as much time with that as we should have. But that concludes what I've had today. So there's no other questions. Here's what the information that you need to know as far as CEUs. And if there is any questions, or if you actually want to talk to me further about all of this, it's easy to get a hold of me just through White River Academy as well.
Yeah, so after today's presentation, just to let everybody know, you will be receiving an email within the next 72 hours, next few days. It will have a link for you to go ahead and obtain your continuing education credits. You'll have to answer a few short questions in order to receive your certificate, but all instructions will be explained in the email for you. I also want to let everybody know that there will be a recording of this actual webinar also available for you to view. You will receive all this information again within the next few days, and if you have any further questions, there will be a phone number on that email as well. If you're having trouble with any parts of the process, just give us a call and we'll help you through it. And that's pretty much it.